Well, hello everybody. Jacob Winograd here in the LCI Green Room. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast. For those of you who may not be familiar, who are just tuning in to, I shared this around some different spaces like Mises Caucus groups and just places where it's like, hey, if you want to come and hang out with, libertarian Dave Smith friendly audience to watch this debate that's happening tonight, you can do that. But yeah, I'm excited to have you all here watch with me. I'm also a member of the Crucible Discord, and so I might be able to call in when they do the audience Q&A part and grill Andrew some more. But yeah, how are y'all doing tonight? Let me know if you guys can hear me okay. I see we got JC in the chat. JC, you're the MVP of the libertarian podcasting sphere. Uh, I don't have anything alcoholic, but cheers to you, good sir. Um, yeah, I'm too tired for anything harder than tea tonight. I've I have been podcasting way too hard this week. Been up way too late multiple times. But yeah, no, this is definitely going to be a good debate. So I see Conrail. You're saying your money's on Dave Smith. I mean, I of course think Dave Smith is right, and I think Dave is a very talented debater. Andrew and Dave have the same problem, which is they rarely go up against people who are talented at debate and who don't have like completely incoherent worldviews. And although I have complaints about Andrew's perspective, it's a lot closer to mine and closer to sanity than Dave's used to debating. And then obviously Andrew's he's debated me, but I don't think he's debated like I'll concede. I think I'm okay at debate, but I think Dave's more experienced and uh so it's going to be interesting. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe Dave wipes the floor with Andrew, but I got a feeling it's going to, come somewhat to a standstill, and it'll get into a lot of minutia and nuance, and then it'll just come down to uh, who can navigate those things better. But Dave's, they're both used to dominating the conversation, so it's going to be it's definitely going to be interesting. I guess I'll do some of the podcast stuff that podcasters do while we're waiting, where I tell you to please like and subscribe to wherever you're watching this. I think I'm only streaming tonight to YouTube and to X. But if you're on YouTube, please subscribe, hit that like button. Of course, it really helps with the algorithms. If you're watching on X and you want to go watch YouTube, you can just click off of that, go to my profile. I have the link shared. But if you want to watch on X, that is okay too. Channel's grown a lot recently, which I'm very happy about. I'm up to like 1,500 subscribers on YouTube from just like a little over 800 a few weeks ago. So it's starting to take off and get a little bit of traction. Still pretty small when I'm compared to guys like the two debating tonight, but it's a lot of fun. I've had Dave on my show several times, which if you guys haven't checked out those episodes, you should. I've had I've had Dave on to talk about like peaceful parenting and the relationship between Christianity and libertarianism. And then I also had him on a little while ago to talk about immigration back when Dave was getting raked over the coals for his immigration position, which is controversial. Or I mean, maybe not that controversial, but it was controversial insofar as he was calling open borders libertarians worse than communists. So that's that was a fun saga. Dave's good at angering the libertarians, which I've been doing a lot lately. Which it's not that hard. I literally just go on Twitter and I go, libertarians believe in morality. Libertarianism needs virtue, and the libertine, uh, progressive libertarians, they lose their minds. Uh, so you got a couple comments here. Justin Crumley, I'm working on an argument for Christian libertarianism. Curious what you think. It's not totally fleshed out, but this gets the idea across. Here it is. If Satan is not omnipresent and his demons are limited in number, he only benefits when men centralize the use of force, because then he needs to influence a few people to affect the masses. Uh, Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I mean, the Bible does refer to Satan as the ruler of this world, so to speak. You have, of course, when Jesus was tempted in the desert, Satan says that the kingdoms are mine to give to you if you bow down to me. Uh, it's interesting, sort of trying to figure out exactly how much power Satan has in this world. I know uh, actually my church, I think 2 weeks ago, they did a sermon talking about this because it's easy to it's easy to overstate it, and it's also easy to understate it. But yeah, certainly, whether it's Satan or whether it's just man's own corruptible nature, the more you centralize power, the more that centralized power tends towards corruption, and the incentives work against you. This was the core of my argument against Andrew when I debated him, was that if you care about, like, because he's a Christian populist, Christian nationalist, so like if you want a Christian nation, centralizing power is about the worst way to go about doing that, because we see throughout history, not just American history, but uh, history in Eastern and Western Europe. The totalitarians view Christianity as an enemy, because if you're a Christian, and Dave understands that, even though Dave's not like he's not as well studied in like theology as I am, right? Like I have that on Dave, and Dave's more experienced in the libertarian world and in politics. But what Dave does understand, the core of this connection between Christianity and libertarianism, which is that uh, the state views Christianity as a threat because you have something that's sovereign above the state, and so uh, people are more willing to reject state authority when they have a final authority above it that they submit to. Um, I'm going to should I set this up? Ooh, should have set this up before the stream, but I'm going to set up the share screen here. Uh, we're live. Yep, we're 5 minutes away from starting, so let's get this set up. See, present, share screen. We're going to do Wilson share. All right. So I can either do it this way, do it this way. That makes it disappear. That's not great. Uh, it doesn't work that way. Guess I have to be this small out here. I think I might do it. Yeah, we'll do it this way. You guys can let me know which lookout looks better. Yeah, look, there's two JCs in the chat. It's interesting. They're multiplying, so to speak. Doesn't let me. I guess before the stream goes live, you can't maximize it yet. So once that goes live, I will bring that back up. Does I don't even know how to pronounce this. Is it I but does libertarian mean no laws and stuff? So that's an interesting question. Let's see if I can answer it in uh, the 5 minutes ish we have left before the debate starts. So libertarianism, I would say, is a legal theory first and foremost. Oh, I-Fi, thank you. So the uh, the legal theory of libertarianism, and I would come from more of a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist view, um, but some libertarians are minarchists, but it's essentially the non-aggression principle. So you're not allowed to. It's a sort of ban against initiatory force. It's a theory of private property rights, and so uh, the saying goes that libertarian anarchy is no rulers, but not no rules. It means that you're going to have a system of decentralized governance, or I like the term a polycentric legal order rather than a monocentric, which is what the state is. Or even if you have a minarchist state, it's going to be hyper localized and very limited in its scope and power. So, but yeah, I say libertarians are, yeah. uh, libertarians are, but it's funny because you say you're you're just messing with me. But you, there are libertarians who, when you say that there should be law and order, they lose their minds because they don't. They're not really libertarians. They are like libertines who just want to do whatever they want. They just want the government out of their lives so they can be as degenerate as they want. And then if you're like, you know, talking about actual libertarian theory, they think that you're an authoritarian because their their libertarian understanding is just very shallow. So, yeah, it's essentially the non-aggression principle at the end of the day. Although, um, I don't know, you can make it really simple like that, but then if you're describing how private law works, it can get rather complicated. So, just depends on what level of explanation you're trying to give to someone. Let's see, Conrail, I'd like to see a ecumenical Christian culture govern society. That way, all of the Christian denominations and non-denominations have a better chance of governing the self-governors in morals, etc. Um, yeah, this was sort of what Andrew and I agreed upon in our debate, which was sort of that I so if there's going to be a prevailing culture and a prevailing morality, a prevailing group, so to speak, well, I'd rather that be Christians than liberals or progressives or atheists or secularists. So uh, now, what Christians do then, if they have that consensus and that majority in society, that moral majority, Andrew calls it a monopoly on force because they would be able to do that. But if so it's like I would, yeah, ideally rather have a Christian society than a non-Christian society. The questions you have to ask are, what are you willing to do to get there? Uh, a point I pressed Andrew on. So what's funny is Andrew popped on a stream I was doing the other day with Kyle Matovik, and we got into this again. And I was like, you know what? The thing you got to realize is that when you're pushing for your Christian populism, how are you sure it's going to be like not just nominal Christians running the show? Because kind of what we have now, right? Like for the longest time, the right, even the Democrats, they said they were all Christian, but they're kind of just nominal Christians. So and nominal Christians who aren't actually operating off of real Christian ethics, they tend to just be filthy statists and rather unchristian in their policy. So, um, so yeah, I mean, Gary brings up a good point in the comments. Which Christian populism, right? And that's even if it is Christian, like because you could have is it Lutheran? Is it uh, Presbyterian? Is it Anabaptist? The Anabaptists wouldn't seek power. Who are we kidding? But the but yeah, and then that's assuming you even get a real Christian denomination and not just nominal Christians. So, uh, Ofer Nave says not all libertarians will be good without coercion, but it doesn't justify centralized tyranny over all. Yeah, I would agree with that. We're not consequentialists. Um, Something I said a while ago. You cannot have liberty without morality. Uh, you can not have liberty without morality, but you cannot have morality without liberty. When you sacrifice one for the other, you wind up with neither and lose both. Yeah, I would agree with that. The way I put this to Andrew was really I'm just copying Dave Smith and going one step further because Dave goes, libertarians need to learn a conservative lesson, conservatives need to learn a libertarian lesson, and I'm saying Christians need to learn a libertarian lesson, and libertarians need to learn a Christian lesson. Because if you don't have a moral people, you can't have a libertarian society. And if you don't have a libertarian society, and if you have a giant state, it's going to subvert the church and subvert Christian values. So yeah, I agree. It cuts both ways, in that regard. Uh, the Yeah, and then he brings so obviously the Holy Roman Empire worked out so well in Europe. So like Andrew was trying to argue that like the Eastern, like the Byzantine Empire and the kingdoms and stuff lasted a long time, and that made them good. In our last exchange on Andrew on a Kyle show, I'm not an expert in Eastern European history, so I kind of had to say, well, I doesn't exist anymore. Uh, I'm a little skeptical of that. I'm gonna have to dive into. I know more about Western European history. I don't know much about Eastern European history and Russian history and all that. So I'm gonna have to dive into that a bit more if I tangle with Andrew or the Eastern Orthodox Christian populists again. Let me refresh this screen here, see if it's started yet. Nope, it has not started yet. It's 9 o'clock. We're just waiting on Andrew and Dave to get this going. Don't chase Chase. Don't chase Chase. uh, yeah. This is the worst time for this debate to happen. But like I set it up, and then I was like, man, I hope I didn't set Dave up for failure. He's gonna have to sit and defend Chase Oliver all night. Like I feel bad about that. Um, it's yeah, it, not a great time to be a libertarian. Although, um, I think so. If someone's asking my quick thoughts on Chase Oliver. It's going to be a really bad campaign. Um, and libertarians are going to have to go back to the drawing board um, in 6 months, 8 months, and learn from that. Uh, and some of them are, some libertarians are going to vote for Trump because of this, and they're going to have to go back to the drawing board too when they remember how much Trump talks a good game but doesn't do anything effective when he gets in. Although I do not secretly, I do maybe naively, somewhat. Fingers crossed, hope he frees Ross because if he does that, then that's a win. Yeah, I agree. Dave doesn't need to defend Chase, but I feel like Andrew, because this is what he does. It's a blood sport debate. It's called the Crucible, right? I feel like he's going to keep like this is what you get. This is what he's going to keep on insisting. Libertarianism is going to default to Chase Oliver. So, yeah, uh, it's not ideal. It's a terrible time because you're at work. What do you work the night shift or something, or different time zone or something? Let me refresh this one more time because YouTube doesn't always. If you're like on the page, it doesn't always load right away. We're at 9:02. Saying this guy isn't gonna. Well, it depends what you mean by good faith. It's called the Crucible, and Andrew is a self-described blood sport debater. And so the way it's a formal debate, but it has very loose structure. Like there's a moderator, but it's not like you get 5-minute opening statement and then 10-minute rebuttals and then 15 cross exits back and forth. It's more like they're literally just having a semi-moderated back and forth, and there's a lot of people talking over one another, and it's like instead of getting time to make long arguments and points, you kind of have to jockey back and forth for talking time. And so it's the style. Uh, some people would call it like his style bad faith. I'm generally more charitable. We got the debate.
Drew Wilson, often in the moderator seat myself. Tonight,
You guys
Rob
hear that?
Moore has
Just
graciously
give me some ones in
accepted
the
to
chat if you
come
can
into
hear
the
it.
moderation seat to moderate this debate between myself and Dave Smith on Christian populism versus libertarianism. It should be quite the banger. I'm sure a lot of people have been looking forward to it. It's been buzzed about all week. I guess for some reason people like Dave Smith. I don't know why they like the guy. He's in the background, right? You can hear everything I'm saying. I don't know why they like it, but they do. They like the guy. So we're going to do in the industry what's called the warm up, where I sit here and talk about nothing and kind of shill
Yeah, I
for
agree,
about
Bruce
2 or
Dose.
3
He can.
minutes, hopefully
I
to get
wouldn't
you
want
to
to be
buy
as
my
aggressive as
products
he
so
is,
that
but
I can
a
take lavish vacations.
little bit
This
of
way, we can
assertiveness goes a
filter more
long
people
way.
in the chat who are just now getting the notification. So we'll start the shilling with make sure that you go over to our great merch store and get your Not Today Degenerate mug because it just looks awesome. Let's face it, it looks awesome. Looks great.
Go maximize that for you guys.
And there's other cool stuff at the store too, right? There's other cool stuff there too. What can I say? There is. Hopefully everybody's doing well this fine evening.
Andrew Wilson bringing
Just give it
Hody
a
Johns
few,
and Dave Smith
right? We're going to get
together.
this thing moving in just a minute. Just a minute. Make sure you go get your Not Today Degenerate mugs. We do ask
Jeremiah, Andrew's been
that
on like the
the
Whatever podcast
chat
a lot.
is on its best behavior. I
Probably what
expect
he's
that this
best
could
known for,
become
other than
a
his own
somewhat
work.
contentious debate. Try to keep it within the TOS. Now, I know what that means, right? It's like when you tell kids, hey, stay off the grass. The first thing they do is run over and jump all over the grass. And, basically, I mean, that's the way it goes, right? That's the way it happens. So, anyway, what do you say we get this thing started? I'll be right back with the moderator and the other debater. Don't want to miss this one. I think it's going to be a good debate.
All right, now. Not the same song he played for my debate. The song he played for our debate was a lot better than this. This isn't bad, though. Someone get a screenshot of this, just for posterity's sake. I agree. This is going to be the challenge. All right, here we go.
We didn't have to do that hard cutoff, but because I had been made fun of for 2 years for having a debate intro song, which had a hard cutoff for no good reason at all, I figured we would just, leave it included. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rob. It's all yours.
Finally, someone with sense gets to talk here, so this will be nice. Welcome to the Crucible, everyone, the premier debate channel online right now. We got a good one for you tonight. We have Andrew Wilson from the Crucible. We'll be debating Dave Smith, who, for me, most famous this week for shattering Andrew Cuomo's dreams.
Yeah, good job, by the way, Dave. Good job.
If you have not seen it, it's a banger. It's an all-timer. Please check that out. I'm excited. Fans of both of these guys think it's going to be a fantastic debate. They're going to be going on libertarianism.
Dave's pro-life, but he absolutely obliterated Chris Cuomo.
I think there's going to be a lot to say. Some agreements, but who likes those? Let's get to disagreements. I think it'll be great. They're going to have 7-minute openings, which will start with Andrew, and then we'll go into about an hour and 15 minutes of general discussion, followed by some closings. It'll be 7 minutes. And then we're going to get to questions from the audience. So any super chat you put in, we'll try to get to all of those. And then please be watching the moderators in the chat. They're going to give you instructions of how you could call in. So look for the chat, the moderators that'll be talking about that. And we plan on taking a hefty amount of call-ins. So it's going to be a good one. You want to get involved in this, ask either guy a question, make fun of them. We all have thick skin. Just don't make fun of the moderator, I guess. He's perfect. You can't make fun of him. But other than that, looking forward to it. Why don't we just jump in? I don't think either of you really need that much of an introduction. So Andrew is the challenger. You get to go first. You have up to 7 minutes for your opening statement whenever you're ready.
Sure. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dave, for coming into tonight's debate. I appreciate it. I want to let you know the reason I'm having this debate with you is because I think I can bring you to the dark side of the force. And you're already halfway there. My hope is to convince you to get to the rest of the way there. Libertarianism is, in the end, a system which inevitably leads to degeneracy. The reason libertarians currently have a Skittles nominee for president is because the very ideology itself is corrupt. It starts with the very core idea on which all other ideas are based, which is self-ownership. I know this is a doctrine that Mr. Smith does believe because I have seen him reference it multiple times in multiple appearances, most recently on Reason TV in his case against open borders. It's a failing dogma because it opens up the ultimate can of worms. If people really do own themselves, then we really can't engage with any voluntary actions they take with each other and stop them, overrule them, or force them not to do those actions. This is exactly why Skittles in society exists. By this logic, we can't outlaw incest, prostitution. We can't outlaw gay marriage. We can't outlaw polygamy. We can't even outlaw unaliving yourself. All things which Christian ethics point to as absolutely immoral. Dave can't really say that they are, though. They have to be allowed if you own yourself, or it would be a violation of the self-ownership doctrine. It's nice and all that Mr. Smith has distanced himself from the failure that is the modern Libertarian Party, and I applaud him for doing it, but ultimately, the very reason he had to is because of this reason. It always leads to the absurd outcome of mass degeneracy. It has to. There's no way around it.
I don't recommend this.
Dave assumes, for reasons I don't understand, that
I
his solution of non-promotion yet legalization
I don't want anyone
somehow
going to the
better
hospital because
than
of
the
this stream.
alternative of the state utilizing authority to remove these moral plagues. I want the state busting up prostitution rings and pimps. I want them arresting incest practitioners, and I want them to arrest polygamists. I want them to use force to prevent unaliving of oneself. The anarcho-capitalist, in this case Dave, can't justify the state really doing any of those things. The Christian ethicist can, striking a key balance between what he would call totalitarianism and what are considered freedoms. For us, though, Mr. Smith has outlined a plan, one he often repeats. His plan is to have libertarians move into positions of governance in order to take control of key systems and then abolish them eventually, in hopes that we eventually get to some kind of anarcho-capitalist society over time. He says this because, quote, the perfect is the enemy of the good. This means, of course, that because a thing isn't perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't move to what's better,
not.
even if
That's
what's
the
better
problem,
isn't
is that the
perfect.
Republican Party is
So that the audience knows this is also
more
the exact plan
progressive,
of socialists. They also
ultimately more
want to seize
degenerate in the
government
ways that matter
institutions,
than
abolishing
the
power
LP
over
is.
time in order to end up with a stateless
More,
society,
it's
just
more
like Dave
contrary to
wants.
Christian values.
It's amusing to note that ultimately what both sides are really fighting over is the power of the state and the use of its force. It's hilarious to me that Christians have fallen for any libertarian dogma at all. We have every right to rule as much as the secularists, and the right to wield state power how we see fit to exercise our will, just as the libertarian Mr. Smith wants to do himself, and as the socialists want to do. Mr. Smith definitely can't argue we shouldn't,
right,
as if
he
traditional Christians
any
were in
society
power.
without
Society
God
would certainly
will
be
struggle.
better than it is now. And well, if it's
Because
not
society of
perfect,
moral people,
well,
you don't need a
perfection
big
is the enemy
government.
of the good. Christian ethics is a superior system of justification, starting points, which reject libertarian axioms, including that of self-ownership, on which the non-aggression principle must base itself. I'd like to see Dave demonstrate for us that self-ownership is true. I'm willing to be convinced, but thus far I most certainly am not. I'd like him to
but you
finally
know what?
clarify his
Even as
oughts
bad
and
as
if
Chase
incest
Oliver
ought
is,
be allowed,
the
if
Libertarian
it
Party
isn't
with Chase Oliver
reproductive,
is
if
way
homosexual
closer
marriage
than the
ought be
Republican
allowed,
Party is.
if polygamous marriages ought be allowed, and if unaliving yourself ought be allowed. Anytime in the past I have seen Dave push on these ought claims, he's somewhat evasive and dodgy. And I think it's time to get clear positions and note what he actually does want in society, not as preferences go, but as his ought of self-ownership demand people be allowed to do. With no evasion, tell us what is true, that you do believe prostitutes ought to be able to be prostitutes if they want, that those who want to unalive ought to be able to do that, that polygamists ought to be able to marry as many people as they want, that Skittles people ought to be able to get married, that drug use ought to be legal regardless of the drug. I'd like to get into these distinct philosophies. I think that's enough for us to start with.
Philosophically an ANCAP,
And with that,
but
I'll yield my
willing
time to
to
Dave.
operate in a minarchist sense.
All right, Dave,
I would
whenever
say
you're ready,
like I am.
go ahead. You got up to 7 minutes.
Sure. So as I said, I'll make my opening a bit of a response to yours because I'm just meeting you guys tonight and I didn't exactly know what I was in for. But I will say that I know, Andrew, I have seen on Twitter, you in your bio, you refer to yourself as a paleoconservative, and that I would just say, sorry, were you going to say something? Oh, no, sorry. I would just say that I'm very interested in the re-energizing of that term, and that there are people who consider themselves paleoconservatives today. I'm a big let's just say I was very influenced, and I've read a lot of paleoconservative thinkers, Paul Gottfried, Pat Buchanan, Sam Francis, guys like this. One of the things that I think was great about all of those guys was that they all, the term paleoconservative actually came from hearkening back to the old right, which were a group of anti-statist right-wingers back who were, fighting the New Deal and fighting keeping America out of World War I and out of World War II. I would just say, in response to some of the things you said there, the idea of libertarianism and self-ownership
Dave said
does
he's
not
an
at all
agnostic,
imply that
but
anyone is
could be
allowed to do
wrong.
whatever they want to do, and it certainly doesn't
He said
imply
he
that
still
you
doesn't know what
can't
he
say
thinks about
something is
Jesus last I
horrifically
talked to him.
immoral, even if it doesn't violate the principle of self-ownership. Certainly, property rights would be a great example of where someone wouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want to do if they were on someone else's property who didn't wish to allow them to do that. I think that a lot of the
I think his wife is Christian.
later stuff we
Or at least
probably
her
have to get
family
into in the
is
back
Christian.
and forth and when we're asking
be
each
wrong.
other questions. I think there are lots of examples of degeneracy that you could bring up and ask whether I think we ought to be allowed to do them or not. The question to me isn't so much whether we ought to be allowed to do them, it's how society ought to treat them and what exactly has led us to the point where these awful things are so celebrated. So I'm sure there'll be more time to get into all of these things, but I would just say that I think from what I'm hearing at the beginning here, there's a big misunderstanding of what exactly it is I stand for, and also what kind of the tradition of resisting centralized authoritarian control is really all about. But I'm happy to talk more about this.
All right. Opening statements done. So I'm going to try to stay out of it as much as possible. We'll let you two go back and forth. You only hear from me if the audience can't hear because there's too much talking over each other. Other than that, we've got about an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes. You guys go ahead.
Dave, can you demonstrate for us how you own yourself?
Well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Do you own yourself?
Yes.
Can you demonstrate that?
I mean, I'm demonstrating. We're both demonstrating it right now on this show.
Well, you're not demonstrating that you own yourself.
What do you mean by own?
Well, I think that ownership of a thing is just a social construction. That ownership itself is just a parameter of agreed upon criteria.
Oh, okay, but if you were
hang on, let me finish the point.
Sure.
For which, so that's how we know. So I own that guitar because we agree that I own that guitar. That's it. That's the only reason I own it. I don't think that there's anything which is that you can point to that would demonstrate that this exists outside of a social construction we agree to.
Okay. Well, I'm missing your point here.
My point is that I think it's a social construction when you say that you own yourself. I don't think that
I didn't say it's not a social construction.
Well, then you don't own yourself?
That's a false binary. I'm not. Hold on one second. Listen,
no. That's a law of logic. You either do or you don't.
No, I didn't say. No, you're asking me if I do or I don't. Do you own that guitar?
Yeah.
Okay, but you just said it's a social construct.
Yeah, but I gave you the criteria for the social construct.
Sure,
would be an agreement of.
And I said I own myself.
Right, but when you say
so, as much as you own that guitar, you've proved
this is
nothing.
incorrect. When I say, "Do you own yourself?" and you say, "I'm not sure," law of logic.
No.
Hang on, let me finish.
I said yes.
Yeah, the law of excluded middle is going to show this. It can only be yes or no. Do you have self-ownership? Yes or no. I own the guitar because we agree we do. Do you only own yourself because we agree you do?
Well, I don't agree that that's what ownership means, but you said yes and I said yes. So we're both exactly even.
Well, then I want to know how you own yourself.
Well, look, if you actually look up ownership in like a dictionary, I think the definition that you gave would be a little bit different than that. So do I exercise my control over myself? Do I do so morally? Yes, I think so. And I actually think that in order for us to even have this conversation, we both
Right.
have,
Andrew likes to play the
in a
game
sense,
of confusing
agreed to that
prescription with
principle.
description.
I don't
It's-
think we have.
It's me versus you. Do
Yeah,
you
how have
own-
we
Do you own the
agreed?
arguments that you're making so far in this
No,
conversation?
you don't. How do you own an argument?
No, I mean, when I say that, I mean, is it yours? Are
It
words
came
you're
out of my
saying-
mouth,
Are the
sure, but
words you're saying yours?
but
and
how
the
would
words I'm
that
saying
make the
mine?
application that I own that thing?
Well, look again. Define own.
I think that the definition of ownership would be a social construct in which you and I, via agreement criteria, decide that X thing becomes property which is assigned to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So
by
if that's
that
true,
by that definition, do you own yourself?
I would say by the definition of that social construction, I could say that you own yourself, sure.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't mean anything. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Because if the
Wait,
social,
what did we just
because
do this whole time?
let
I'm
me
not
explain.
getting it.
Because if the social construction, what if we change the social construct and we decide that you can own a person, Dave?
Right. Okay. And what if we change the social construct and says I own your guitar and I own you?
Right.
What do you?
That's
what's the
exactly
point?
right. What if we
Okay.
change the social construction of ownership to mean you can own a person? Does that mean that people no longer own themselves?
Well, the difference here, right, is that, and it's the word that I mentioned that you didn't, is that I would say that ownership would imply that you're justified in that claim.
How are you justified in that claim?
How am I justified in the claim of owning myself?
Yeah, you just said if you agreed it's
Okay.
a social construction. So if we agree that it's a social construction, then we can own other people as via social construction. That would be justified.
Well, I don't think so. So the major difference there, right, is that as we're having this conversation, and clearly what's the goal here? To persuade, probably not to persuade each other, but at least to persuade the audience who's listening to us, because we recognize that they are in control. Forget the word own, because that's triggering, evidently, but they are
I'm not triggered by the word own.
Okay. When I say triggering, meaning that's going to start a whole nother debate about semantics. So
yeah, but semantics are important in a debate.
Okay, well, all right. Let's not do this tactic of interrupting every 2 seconds. So let me just finish my point here. So we are both presuming that the people who are listening to this are in control of their own thoughts, and we could potentially persuade them toward our cause. And so if we're doing all of this, we kind of are recognizing in some sense that it's more valuable to persuade people than it is to, I don't know, just enforce our will on them. And so in that sense, I would say that, yes, there is some kind of norm that there's a justifiable path where you can persuade people versus force them.
Sure. Well, I agree that you can persuade all sorts of people and that can be part of a societal norm and that everybody can agree that that's part of a societal norm. That does not demonstrate that you own yourself. Thus, the key principle for the non-aggression principle, which is self-ownership, that's where the violation comes in. Do people own themselves? Is that a justified position or isn't it?
I'm saying that, yes, I think it is. But again,
then can you demonstrate it?
Well, what would you mean by that? What would it mean to demonstrate that you own
would
yourself?
you
What
would
do you
have
mean?
to prove that you own yourself.
That I can control myself, or what? Again, just be clear about what you're asking.
Well, here, let me give you an example. Yeah, I'll give you an example to the contrary. I have seen throughout all of human history that human beings seem to be able to own other human beings without much problem. That doesn't seem to be a problem. As long as the social construction of ownership of the time states that you can own another person, you seem to be able to just fine.
Right.
So this axiom of self-ownership is not obvious to me. To be an axiom, it has to be self-apparent and self-obvious.
So what demonstrated that people owned other people throughout time? Prove that to me. The same way you just said to me, prove to me that I own myself.
But I did.
No. Hold on.
I'll prove it to you again.
Well, hold on. Let's try to not. We're only a couple minutes.
You interrupted me. I didn't interrupt you.
Well, hold on. You just asked me to prove that I own myself, and then you asserted that throughout history people owned other people. So prove that.
Yeah, but we already did, and let me explain how. You and I already agreed that ownership is a social construction, and that throughout history, the social construction had changed where people were able to own other people via the social construct. So whatever the social construct is of the day, that's all it is. As long as you agree that ownership is a social construction, you basically have to bite that bullet, right?
Wait, no, I'm not even understanding what you're saying here. So we agreed it was a social construct, and then your next statement after that was, prove to me that you own yourself.
Yeah, a social construction doesn't exist in objective reality.
Right.
It's
So
a
you said
term.
prove, prove to me that anyone ever owned someone else throughout history. And all you said was it was a social construct as well.
You mean like a contract of ownership between slaves or something?
No, it's your question. So you tell me how to
Yeah,
answer it.
my claim is that ownership is a social construction. Do you agree or disagree with that claim?
I think it is a social construct, but
Okay.
there also can be ethical and non-ethical, or moral and immoral.
Well, then if you make the
ownership.
assertion that it's anything more than a social construction, then the burden of claim is on you to demonstrate how it could be.
Well, okay. I mean, again, you're dodging my question here. I asked you the same question you asked me, and you weren't able to answer it either.
I did answer it.
By the way, part of the reason why I asked is because I don't exactly understand the question you're asking me. Are you asking me to say why I think, how I could prove that it is moral that one person should own themselves rather than someone else own them? Is that
that's
the question?
that's not the question. The question. So here's the question. Let me explain it to you.
Okay.
The non-aggression principle itself revolves around the idea that human beings own themselves, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the thing is that you and I can agree that there's been tons and tons of slavery throughout human history, correct? Okay. So those people clearly own these other people. So this has to be a social construction of agreement is what is ownership. We agree that you own it, therefore you own it. What I'm asking for is some type of justified evidence that that is not the case, and that there is some moral ought or some type of demonstration, philosophically or otherwise, that a human being actually owns themselves.
Okay, so just to be clear here, if I were to say, if you're saying ownership meaning just strictly control over who has something, then yes, there have been lots of times where people can come just take all your stuff and then claim they own it. And if you're saying the law recognizes it or the society recognizes it, then essentially they own it. So
they can do that with people too, right?
Right. And in a sense, I agree with you. And that
so then you don't own yourself.
Okay. Let me just finish what I'm saying.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. I mean, dude, we got a long show here, so let's just let each other talk. So in a sense, I agree with you. Yes, you can take possession of something. I don't think anybody is arguing that, and I don't think it's a very impressive point to make that, yes, people can take possession of something, and that could be codified by law or society. What we're talking about is something slightly different, which is justified ownership over something. So then the claim is like whether it's morally right that you own this or not. Fair enough. And I'm sure there's lots of
I'm just looking
areas,
for the demonstration of what is morally right.
Sure. Well, okay. If you're looking for the demonstration of what is morally right, I'm sure there's lots of areas where you would believe something is morally right and something else is wrong. And the demonstration of it would be what? That this is what you believe. This is what seems to be right and wrong. This is what has been accepted. And
no, my justification would be divine command, not seemings or phenomenal conservatism.
Okay,
which is what seemings are.
So okay, but so divine command. So what? And how would you exactly determine what is and isn't divine command?
Let's assume for a second that I was, I don't know, like delirious, right, and just thought I talked to God, and He gave me commands, right. If it's just preference, if we're just going off of preference, just things which Dave prefers are true, and Dave just prefers that you own yourself because he does, then any preference that I came up with in this delirious state where God was speaking directly to me would be just as valid as whatever preferences that you just axiomatically come to because you just want them to be true. What my claim here is that libertarianism at its foundation, at its fundamental foundation, is flawed because this axiom of self-ownership isn't
Yeah, he
actually
keeps-
true, but
keeps
rather
on
a social
trying to
construction which
push
is asserted as though
cycles between
it is
prescriptive
a
and
truism
descriptive.
when it clearly is not.
And,
So that's
and
it's a
Dave's doing a good
fundamental
job of
flaw.
not letting him.
The reason that you guys come up with such absurd conclusions like that prostitution ought to be legal and all these other things is, and by the way, Dave, you have to end up with that. Otherwise, people don't own themselves. Do you think the state should come in and, like, you know, stop your brother from unaliving himself, for instance? Do you think that they should do that?
Well, hold on. All right, stick with your point that you were making at first, because you're just jumping all around here.
Well,
So
no,
what was
I'm
the first thing you were saying?
Well, I already
here?
gave you the point. I'm saying I
Well,
reject
no,
your
you
axiom.
didn't, though.
I reject the axiom of self-ownership until otherwise demonstrated. That's my point.
Okay, so what would you, so you're saying that if I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the first part that you're saying here, because I'm not getting it at all. So you're saying if somebody hallucinated that something was right and wrong, and it was horrifically not right and wrong, that somehow that disproves the idea that anything is right or wrong?
If it's only axiomatic and based on preference, it would be just
So
as
how
valid.
do you determine if anything is morally right or wrong?
If it's from a preference base, you couldn't.
Okay, so how do you determine that anything is morally right or wrong?
I do it from divine command. You do it from preference. I'm
No,
meeting you
you
where
do it
you're
from
at.
divine command. What does that mean? Explain that.
So this means that I follow Christian ethics. I use transcendental categories inside of philosophy to create justifications for the values which come from God's laws. That's what I do.
That's a lot of words to not say anything. How do you determine?
Do you know what
something is right or
transcendental?
wrong?
Do you know what
Yeah,
transcendental
It's
categories
not that I don't
are?
understand the words.
It sounds like you don't
understand.
understand.
Okay, explain it to me like I'm really stupid. I don't understand any of the words. So explain it to me. How do you determine if something is right and wrong?
Okay, so what I would do to make these determinations is we start with objective versus subjective. What if is it a subjective value or is it an objective value? If we start with it just being a subjective value, then who cares? We never need to go any further than that. Just never need to go any further for justification. So what I've determined is that your values here in libertarianism are subjective value based. Therefore, there's never a reason for me to justify anything objectively to you, because any subjective preference I have is just as valid.
You're not answering my question at
Literally,
all.
that's the most precise answer you could ever get.
Andrew,
if you're a
how do you determine if
I
something
just
is
told
right or wrong?
you divine command.
And then I asked you what that means, and you said
I just
nothing.
explained.
No, you didn't.
Yeah,
you
I
just
did.
said that you think my basis is
Okay,
subjective.
fine, Dave. I'll make it super simple because God tells me so. Is that better for you?
Sure. No, if
Okay.
that's the answer. That's
the answer.
okay.
God tells me
God
so.
tells you,
Yeah.
and through what means does God tell you this?
He directly communicates right into my brain. He's like, that shit's wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, but okay. So, okay. So, just to be clear, the point of that is that, Andrew, it sounds very good when you attack someone and say that's subjective, but when your response to that is God communicates directly into my brain, that also, I mean, I don't know what the word is for that.
Subjective.
But
it would be
subjective
subjective.
would probably be the word.
But that's my whole point. That's how I'm granting your entire argument. It's like, it doesn't matter ultimately, objectively.
But your counter is also subjective. So
right. So then that means that my preference is no worse than your own preference.
Well, I mean, no, it means by your argument, we're even.
Yeah. If I'm using preference-based, if I'm using preference-based arguments, or I'm sorry, preference-based morality, and you're using preference-based morality,
listen,
then we're equal, Dave.
To be clear, I don't think I am using preference-based morality.
Got it. So can you make justification then?
1 second. Let me try to finish the sentence here. I don't think I am making subjective-based morality, but you accused me of that. And so my response to you is, so what's your objective base? And your response is, God talks to me directly into my head.
Yeah, for the purpose of demonstration.
All right. By the way, God also talks to me in my head. And so,
perfect.
All right, fine.
All right. So if God talks,
own standard,
there you go.
You haven't won anything. By your own standard, we're even.
It's not here to win it. It's here to demonstrate it, Dave.
I want to try to, let's try if we can, because we're only a few minutes into this. Let's try. This got more contentious than I thought it would in the first few minutes. Let's try to just, by the way, because I want to have a good conversation with you. And I've been told by people who I love and trust that you were a guy to have a good conversation with.
Yeah, but you keep on evading every question that I have for you.
Oh, all right. I don't think I have. But
so let's answer.
Ask me a direct question.
Great.
I'm happy to answer.
Should the state come in and stop your brother from unaliving himself or not, Dave?
I would want them to. Yes.
Yes. Would you want the state to stop a man from having sex with his sister if it would lead to a non-reproductive
Jesus
act.
Christ. Wait, if it would lead to a non-reproductive act,
Yeah, she has no uterus.
but that
Yeah.
was supposed to be worse than if it would reproduce.
Yeah, it would be worse. It would be less
I'm
worse.
just saying that seemed like an unnecessary caveat to throw on there. But okay, wait, Jesus Christ! What you're talking about, like adults or
Yeah.
children?
Adults.
Okay, fine. Because for children, obviously, that'd be yeah. I guess I would want them to.
Okay, so you want the state to utilize authority.
Well, not just the state. I would want anyone.
Okay,
Stop
so
that.
so I don't
Anyone
understand.
with the force to do it, or
Great.
anyone with the strength to do
So
it. Sure.
so then those people don't own themselves.
No, I don't think that's the conclusion.
Well, if they own themselves, can you demonstrate what they're doing wrong?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
But that's a very silly and very look, this is a very like childish interpretation of libertarianism.
You're still not answering the question. You're just prattling.
No. I did. I immediately answered the question, and now I'm responding to the point you made. So I immediately said, yes, anyone with the authority to do it, please stop, or the power to do it, please stop. And then I was responding to what you said. So I did answer the question. What I'm saying is that the idea that if you own yourself, and this is the fundamental mistake that you made at the beginning, therefore I can't say anything is immoral, is ridiculous. And not only in the libertarian worldview, but in any worldview, there are lots of things, I'm sure in yours, where there could be things that you don't think are illegal, but you still, or you don't think should be illegal, but you still think are wrong. So that doesn't mean anything. If I think people own themselves, I can't think there's something horribly wrong about this.
That's not the point. So let me I'll explain again.
Okay, sure. So please.
If you want the state to go in, if a brother is banging his sister and she can't reproduce, I don't know how you can demonstrate.
Why does reproducing matter in this?
I'll explain
Sure.
why, so that you can't bank on reproduction as being a harm, because it could have like some kid who's all fucked up. So I'm just taking that out of the equation.
Okay. I gotcha.
I'm just taking that out of the equation, right? She has no uterus, they can't reproduce, or maybe they're homosexuals, right? And they're just related. If they own themselves and they're adults, that is exactly what you would make the argument for gay marriage. They're adults. These adults are consenting with each other. Can you actually justify why that's wrong?
Sure.
Then justify why it's wrong.
Well, I can justify why it's wrong. Okay, there's two separate questions here. And this is almost like, I think what you need to pick apart. So look, there's two questions. One is, could I justify someone using force to stop them? And then could I justify why it's wrong? You get where those are two different things?
Yeah, I'm just asking why it's wrong.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah,
but
so let's do that.
Okay. Do you get why those are two different things, though? You get the point I'm making?
Yeah, sure. So can you answer the question now?
Yeah, dude. Listen, man. Do you want to like have a decent back and forth here, or like, do you want to not?
You're still not answering the question.
Okay.
Can you justify why it's actually wrong for two consenting adults?
Yeah. See, the thing is, I am answering the question. You're just kind of being a dick
Well,
and trying to win the debate.
When are you going to answer the question, Dave?
All right, give him a chance.
So is that actually, like, does anyone listening to this think this makes for like good debate tactics? No, you actually are not like recognizing that there's a difference between these two things. So
I just told you I do.
Let's leave him.
All right, do you guys want to do this, man? I fucking like honestly, dude.
You've talked way more than I have, Dave. I just want you to answer my question. Can you justify it or not, bro?
Okay. So anyway, I'll go back to saying, do you guys want to do this? Do you guys want to like do a show here, or like what's the point of this?
You wanted I asked you specifically if you wanted a conversation or a debate. You said a debate. We're debating.
No. I didn't say that. I said we could do whatever you want to do, dude.
Yeah, so we're doing a debate. So let's not do a meta conversation. Just answer the question.
A debate doesn't mean you talk over me every time I try to answer.
I just want you to answer the question.
No, I understand you do, and I was, but you're
Dave,
just
1 second. Here's what we're gonna do. Dave can expound here on what he thinks is occurring here in this debate. And then before you come back in, Andrew, we'll give Dave a chance to specifically answer the question that you've asked. So Dave's going to do two things here.
Ask me the question again. I'm sorry.
Can you justify why two consenting adults who are brother and sister having sex is morally wrong?
Yes.
Then do it.
Okay, because I think it's for the same reason you would think. I think it's against nature. It's evil. It just seems horrible. I don't know. Do you have a better answer for why it's wrong?
Well, yes, divine command.
Divine command. Okay, fine. So I also say divine command. That's why it's wrong.
Well, but then the axiom of self-ownership would be wrong.
No,
how did
it
he?
Wouldn't. No,
well,
it wouldn't. And if you had listened to me when I
that's
was
so
responding
weird,
the first
though.
time, you would understand.
Well, here,
that.
let me now make my argument back.
Yeah,
if they
right,
don't,
right.
if they don't own themselves, right, or if they do own themselves, rather, and they're two consenting adults, just like two homosexuals consenting adults, why is it actually wrong for them to do that? You say because it seems like it's against nature, which isn't the natural fallacy. Couldn't I just apply that to homosexuals as well and say, well, it seems like it's against nature?
Yeah, sure. Maybe you could.
And do you think so? Your moral oughts are based around just things that gross you out?
No, divine intervention, bro.
Divine command?
Yeah, there you go.
So if it's divine command, then you're going to abandon libertarianism and you're going to come over to Christian ethics, right?
No.
No. But I thought you made your justification based on divine command.
So, okay, listen, it's clear that
great point, dude. You're right. You have divine command, and you're asking me why it's wrong for a brother to fuck a sister. Listen, dude, I know, I don't know anything about you. I don't know why Jacob thought this was going to be a good idea. I know you dominate 20-year-old OnlyFans sluts in debates.
I also dominate 45-year-old comedians in debates. What's your point?
41, motherfucker. And listen, and no, you're really not, though. You're asking questions about why it's wrong for a brother to fuck a sister. Oh, okay. I don't know, because I think it's wrong and yes, awful. And also, do I think that the government, if we're talking about adults, is it being outlawed going to be a great way to regulate that? Probably not. What even is your vision? I mean, this is the dumbest fucking question to get into what the role of government ought to be. Yes, you're right. If the FBI is breaking in and stopping 25-year-old and 28-year-old brothers and sisters from having sex with each other, that's okay. We
but
need
they
the
do that.
to do
just
that.
So you know, they do that right now. Are you opposed to it? They actually arrest people for doing this and they drag them off to jail. And they put them in jail for doing that.
I'm not nearly as aware of this as you are, Andrew, but
yeah.
I'm not going to fight against that law.
Yeah, but here's the thing then. What I don't understand is that if the argument for self-ownership is that consenting adults can do whatever it is they want to do, because they're consenting adults are not hurting anybody else, this would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. Why couldn't a brother and a sister engage in this in Dave's libertarian land? Why couldn't they? Why shouldn't they be able to? Honestly.
Sure. Well, why shouldn't they do it is for moral reasons. I suppose you could make an argument that if people really do have freedom, then a grown, grown adults who are related should not be banned by law and should not have a cop bash him over the head with a baton for having sex with a cousin or something. Okay, but you're taking this to this weird extreme example where
that happens now.
Oh, sure. Okay. Anyway, so you're taking this to a weird extreme example where, okay, let's take it to the other extreme and say, do you believe that the government should rush into your house anytime you're doing anything where they determine that that's degenerate or not moral or productive? You're smoking a cigarette right now. Is that enough of a reason for someone to come get you? Would there be any realm where you would say, maybe the government shouldn't be regulating every inch of what I determine from divine, whatever that is moral or immoral?
Yeah, so actually this makes my point for me. This is great. So the reason that I just go ahead and concede a lot of these points, because there's no real reason to fight them. For instance, if you agree with me that the only justification that you can have is that, well, because God told you it's gross, and so therefore you ought to not do it, then this would mean that you agree with me in divine command and should be a Christian ethicist. That's why that's done. That's why I just make it super easy for you to go ahead and agree. And you did. You agreed. absent. So I'm just going to ask this straight out. Okay. And no, I don't believe in that sort of government overreach. And I can give you my systems and reasons for why that is too, under Christian ethics, or Christian ethics, where we both take into account consequence, but also take into account duty. So I'm going to ask this: absent any kind of divine command, God didn't tell you anything, would you say that it's not moral? And can you justify why it's not moral for a brother to hump his sister? Could you do that absent divine command? Like, honest question, Dave. This is super important.
Sure. So I would say this, right? I grew up an atheist. Well, I mean, I'm Jewish, but I grew up like not a religious person. It was just, you know, kind of what I was born into. And I was pretty much an atheist for most of my life. And then I had some experiences as I became a young adult that made me think about God and kind of get in touch with him. And then it was really when I had my first child that I really found God. So I would agree with you that, yes, there is something from God that instructs me as to what is right and wrong in this world.
Sure.
However, but before I ever believed in God, yeah, there was just a deep feeling inside of me that would have been very wrong. And I do believe that was always from God. So,
okay.
I don't know.
Then absent God,
what that proves.
So then absent God,
nothing in this argument.
Yeah. No, it does though. And I'm going to explain how.
Go ahead.
Because you're saying that absent God is just your preferences. It's just how you feel.
No,
that's what makes what's moral or not moral. Then what would make it immoral? Absent God.
See, here's the thing, dude, Andrew. I think you're doing a thing here that a lot of like internet blood sport debaters try to do, which is that you're trying to win before you're actually listening to what I'm saying.
I can steel man the entire thing if you'd like.
Try to listen to what I actually said and grapple with that. What I said was not before I believed in God, it was just subjective. What I said was before I believed in God, I always had this feeling, and what I believe is that was always God. So to steel man, that's a very different thing than what you said. All right?
Sure. So I'll just steel man the position. The position, to make sure I don't get this wrong at all, is that you believe that there was some type of natural law given to you by God before you ever even believed in God, correct?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Great. So I steel man the position. So to my question, which you didn't actually answer,
sure,
which is this: absent God, if there was no God, could you justify why this would be immoral or not?
Yeah, I don't know that you could. I think absent God, it's very difficult to arrive at morality.
Right. So absent God, so you're a divine command as well, divine command theorist, just like myself. So if that's true and you're a divine command theorist, and we have now shown how self-ownership leads to absurd conclusions like a brother being able to hump their sister.
No, but I disagree with it. Okay.
Well, okay. Why can't, if you own yourself, why can't you hump your sister if she owns herself, Dave? That makes no sense.
What do you mean by why can't you? Why can't, if you don't own yourself, why can't you hump your sister? What does that mean?
Good question. But my point is, with the non-aggression principle, the entire axiom.
You're not asking anything, dude.
Yeah, I am.
So let's just say this. And man, I wish you had picked an example that wasn't so fucking uncomfortable to talk about. But here, you, Andrew, don't own yourself. Why can't you just hump your sister?
You could.
Exactly. So what the hell are you asking? What's the question?
But that goes to my point. I think that if you actually have self-ownership as something more than an axiom, meaning it's justified somehow that you actually do own yourself, it's not just a social construction, then you wouldn't be able to hump your sister if you did not own yourself, right?
What do you mean wouldn't be
but if
able
you do,
to?
But if you do own yourself, you can still hump your sister. The point being,
Andrew, do you own yourself?
Under the current paradigm of the social construction, we would say yes.
Okay, but so if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to hump yourself. I don't get.
No, you still could, but that is the point.
So that's it. So you still could. So what are you saying?
So let me try again. Just listen to what I'm saying, like I just did yours. In fact, maybe you can steel man this for me. Okay, maybe like I just did for you.
Let me listen, and I'll see if I can.
So my point is that self-ownership is why you should not be allowed to aggress against another person, because they own themselves. Correct?
Okay.
Is that correct? Isn't that the basis of the NAP? You own you, I own me. That's why we cannot aggress against each other, correct?
Sure.
Okay, got it. And yet here we're both talking about using state authority to aggress against people who own themselves, who aren't actually doing anything you can justify as being wrong outside of Christian ethics. And so the thing is that seems to dispel the NAP. Now, can you steelman that back to me?
Okay.
So I know.
So you're saying that if we own ourselves,
Mhm.
and everybody and an act of aggression would be violating someone else's self-ownership,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be an act of aggression to what? Kill yourself, incest amongst adults, things like this.
Right.
Okay. So I'm
So,
still
so if that's true, and the only moral oughts that we have for why you shouldn't do this is through Christianity.
No, I
which
didn't
is
say no. By the way, I didn't say Christianity, but you said that. But
okay, fine. God, whatever the justified axiom is for God, for divine command. Okay.
Sure.
If that's the only way that we can justify that this is immoral, then the idea that you owning yourself and two consenting adults owning themselves in anarcho-capitalist land can't be true, because you are willing to use and violate their self-ownership with aggression because you think they're doing something morally wrong, but you can't justify what they're doing that's morally wrong.
No, okay. So again, this is back what I was trying to say before, that I think there's these two things that need to be separated. So there's the moral application of the initiation of violence, and then there's morality. And they're not exactly the same thing. And so if my neighbor, let's just say, my neighbor is not being a good husband and being a good father. Okay, so like let's say he's just very cold with his children, and like doesn't pay the bills on time, and doesn't work, and is lazy, and does all types of things that I judge to be morally wrong. Like I think he should be a better father and a better husband. But if I go over there and beat him over the head with a club to make him be a better husband and father, it's not as simple an equation as, was he morally right or wrong? The question is it morally justified for me to enact this force against him?
Yeah, I got to be honest. Andrew's
in order
being
to
way
make,
more like
is
Andrew
that
was almost more polite
moral
to
or
me
immoral
than he is to
than
Dave,
his initial sin?
which
So
is
that's
not
the
doesn't make
question that
sense,
you
'cause
get
Dave's,
into
like,
when you
a
start
million
talking
times
about
bigger than
government
I am.
regulating a
So
lot
I
of
don't
these
know why
things.
he's
It's not as simple as you're making it out, that,
he's,
well, if people own themselves,
he's being a
then
jerk.
it
I
has
understand
to be
why Dave's
morally
upset.
justified, whatever they do.
Okay, so let's see if we can't parse this out. And again, I'll see if I can't just steelman this with my criticism. So the thing is that I agree. We can look at scales, right? We can say that we can get to absurd conclusions if we were to say that there's no time or place to apply some sort of like aggression towards somebody, right? Otherwise, you would aggress on them for anything that you consider some kind of moral failure, and obviously, that's not what either of us are after.
Sure.
What I'm saying is that if we take it to its logical conclusion, libertarianism, which is what I said in my opening, as a consequence of itself, has to actually lead to degeneracy. And the reason is because of the idea here is that I own me and you own you. And if we consent to the two things we do together and it hurts nobody else, therefore not violating the non-aggression principle, which is the foundation for which this thing, revolves, then how can you make ever a claim against homosexuals getting married, or against incest, or against any of these things? How can you possibly make that claim? That's the ultimate question.
Okay, so a couple things here. I don't think that's the ultimate question, and I do think that I could make the claim against that in the same way that you could. And I think we already established this, right? That we can both make the claim for the exact same reasons, because we believe in God and we believe in morality and we believe that this is immoral. So we both have the exact same ability to make the claim. But if we're talking about what your more, I think, broader point that you made there, that libertarianism leads to immorality, I think is completely wrong. And I think this is like kind of the most important fundamental miscalculation that a lot of people on the right who reject libertarianism make. The idea that, well, freedom and liberty is really what leads to degeneracy. And that's just not true. And in fact, empirically and logically, we can look at the situation, particularly the situation of the United States of America, and go, look, as the government has grown bigger and bigger, you've seen degeneracy get more and more out of control. And I understand why there is a movement against degeneracy. I understand we live in a moment right now where I think our society is essentially disintegrating. And I think that that's one of the things that, Andrew, you kind of are, I don't know, prominent for pointing out. The disintegration of values and norms all throughout.
Yeah, but the reason I
society.
believe that those values and norms are being eroded is because of libertarians and social leftist elites who often will move towards this principle of non-aggression. They just do it in two different ways. The way one, which libertarian does it, is by saying, if I'm not violating you and your non-aggression principle in some way, then you really have no claim to tell me to do anything, and everything is affirmed through private property. The leftist just affirms it the opposite direction, says there's no such thing as private property, but they apply the same principle of, if I'm not hurting anybody, then what's the problem? And so as we dive into what is the non-aggression principle, the non-aggression principle is the principle that if you are not aggressing against somebody else and you own yourself, they cannot aggress against you. So via consent, you cannot utilize the state, Dave, to have them go and break up an incest family who is all consenting with each other and having orgies nightly. You can't do it.
I understand that's your perspective on this, but that has nothing to do with what I'm getting into. So actually what the non-aggression principle implies is that at best, government ought to be severely restricted, and at worst, government ought to not exist at all. Now, as we've had the rise in government, and I mean, look, in the United States of America, just in the last 20 years, in the last 20 plus years, which we could go back a lot further than that, you've had a tremendous growth in the size of government.
Finally got past all that.
What happens
awful
as the government gets bigger and bigger is that
now they're getting the stuff I actually wanted them to talk
about. Christians and traditionalists tend to value get undermined. And so this institution of the government that is inherently based on violating the non-aggression principle does its absolute best to replace, take over, and monopolize all of the areas where traditionally family and community had domain. And
yeah, so but why would that be problematic if the non-aggression principle logically should be ignored for these moral oughts? That's that is the question.
Well, hold on. That's a separate question. The point I'm making is that it's not an outgrowth of the non-aggression principle. It's an outgrowth of a rejection of the non-aggression principle. That's actually what leads to all.
So then if we were to have the non-aggression principle with a shrunken government, are we still going to use the government in order to aggress against consenting adults who want to have incest? Or not?
As long as a government exists, it will be used to aggress against non-consenting adults. And
great.
So, yes,
then
I don't know.
Yes.
Listen, Andrew, you're trying to obsess over this incest argument. Okay, laws
it's foundational.
Laws against incest. I'll grant you that. Sure. Fine.
Dave's
Can we move on to any other
did.
topic now?
Yeah, but
can we move on to talking about the state of the country as it actually exists?
Yeah, but this is the state of the country as it actually exists.
Well, hold on. It's pretty funny because we live under the most powerful centralized government in the history of the world. The biggest organization in the history of the world is the United States of America's federal government in Washington, D.C., spending over $6 trillion a year, employing millions of people with the capability of overthrowing regimes all around the world. And instead, the argument we're getting here is, but if there was no government, who would stop an adult brother and sister from fucking? That's kind of goofy, man. It doesn't really have anything to do with
I just want to let you know that saying
it's
kind of goofy isn't an argument. You just said if we scale the government down to its umpteenth point of scale down, as long as there was still a government, you would want them to enforce action via violating the non-aggression principle for your preference. So if there was...
No, that's not what I said.
Well, it's an entailment. If the government's really, really, really big and enforce it right now, and then you say, but if it was really, really small, we would still enforce that because you want to have those laws, then regardless of the size of government, the degeneracy is still going to exist, right? And it's still going to need to be enforced against regardless of the size of the government.
Wait, I'm sorry, just can you rephrase the question? What is it exactly you're asking me?
I'm asking you, if we reach anarcho-utopia, we scale the government
I'm
down.
not for a utopia, but
okay,
so
but
whatever.
if we reach anarcho, whatever you want, as the ultimate, right? The government is now scaled down to the point where it's essentially gone, right?
Mhm.
Would you still want enforcement against this kind of thing? And how could you have enforcement against it without a government?
What against what kind of thing?
Like incest or gay
Okay,
marriage or any
sure.
of these degenerate actions?
Okay, well, I think there's a pretty big gap between incest and gay marriage, but I will say that
What?
I think there's a gap between
What
that.
is it?
But I think they're two different things.
Yeah, they're two different things, but they're the same as far as two consenting adults doing what they want, right?
Yeah, me and you doing this debate are also two consenting adults doing what they want, but there's a gap between those things. So anyway,
what does that have to do? I mean, it logically
God,
tracks that if we got, dude, you can't go on these long rambling diatribes, and I do 4 seconds. I do 4 seconds, and you go berserk. Just calm down. Let me ask the actual question,
dude. Come on, man. I asked you to clarify your question, and
I'm trying to clarify it so that you understand it.
But don't act like I'm going on these long rants and you're not talking. I mean,
well, you filibuster. You don't say that much, but I'm still willing to engage.
Oh, come on, Andrew.
I'm super concise. So I'm super concise.
Okay.
I'm going to get right to it, right, so that you understand what I'm saying to you. What I'm asking you is that the enforcement mechanism against this degeneracy, which you consider to be morally wrong, absent a state, are you still going to want an enforcement mechanism against these moral wrongs? You say, no, there's a big difference between incest and homosexual marriage or homosexual sex. However, the truth is that both of these things are exactly logically similar when it comes to two consenting adults doing what it is that they want when they want to do it without hurting anybody else. How's that not the case?
Well, again, as I just pointed out, we're also two consenting adults doing what we want without hurting anyone else. But I think that's very different. So I'm just saying that I'm not even saying I support either of those things. I'm saying I see them as different. No, the truth is that if we didn't have what we have today, and this is what happens with every very powerful centralized government, is that their biggest enemy becomes the family, the church, the community, because they don't like things that compete with them. If we actually got rid of all of the impediments between that, you would see an enormous return to normalcy in this country. You would see, I mean, look, starting even in the 1930s with Social Security, when you had the government take over the role of, we'll take care of old people when they get older. What you used to have was what? That parents would rely on their children to take care of them when they get older. Once you remove all of the disincentives toward normalcy and family and community, if the state was to be reduced to the size that you're talking about, no, my concern would not be, do we have federal agents with guns going in to break up incest amongst adults anytime it's happening? I don't even know how you would go about enforcing that.
What about people who just want to transition?
Again, the transitioning stuff is totally a statist product. This is something that's come out of the universities that are essentially government programs that has been perpetuated by the corporate media and
I'm not disputing any of that. Should they be allowed to do it though?
No. Well, that's
no.
Listen,
no.
Well, okay, hold on. Let me say this to be clear. Children, absolutely not. You should not be allowed to do that. Adults, a doctor should lose their license if they were ever to perform a surgery or something.
But it's voluntary.
Sure.
And they consented.
But a license could also be voluntary, and a medical board could also be voluntary. So what does that mean?
Well, so that's interesting that you bring that up, considering that the AMA was just a large corporate entity that was not government regulated. Started off as a
did it get government money?
Started off as a trade organization, in fact, and what it did was it defamed all other types of medicine. And that was not the government doing that. That was a private institution which was doing that for the purpose. For the purpose, Carnegie.
Right.
Another private institution, Carnegie.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the thing is that private institutions are just as susceptible to this type of overreach as the government is.
Well,
now,
okay,
hang on, let me finish. My turn.
Sure. Go ahead.
So as we dive into this, though, these medical licenses, why would you even need to have a medical license in an anarcho-capitalist system? You wouldn't even need to have one. And the voluntarism then of this man who wants to go in and have this elective surgery done, why would that be a problem? There's no medical licenses, Dave. It's anarcho-capitalism, baby.
Okay, so if you're going to say that the worst case scenario in anarcho-capitalism is that some random man could go in and someone would give him this like surgery, okay, fine, I guess. I think that if you're asking why there would be licenses or why there would be voluntary organizations, because that's what human beings always naturally gravitate toward. But regardless of that, none of that is really the problem. The problem in our society is that this insane shit is being pushed on everyone, and it's being pushed by giant corporations who are connected to the government. It's being pushed by the government class, and most importantly, it's being pushed in the government schools. You know, one of the things, and
it's also being pushed by private institutions and think tanks who go to lobbyists and influence the government.
Let me finish.
Let's leave Dave finish. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So one of the things that I would say to people listening to this, because I hope you guys will like kind of try to internalize this a little bit. Look, this whole shit, all of this insane degeneracy is being pushed by the most powerful people in this country. And it's not as if this just organically arose out of nowhere. And I hope you guys would at least consider the possibility that, look, the government always, by its nature, moves into the areas that were traditionally left for family and community and churches. And even something like educating the kids. This is one of the biggest problems that we have, that the government is in control of it. And why? And what would happen if they weren't? It would fall back into the realm of families and communities and churches. And what do you think would be better? What do you think would be better? This being run by Washington, D.C., or this being run by your local church? That's kind of the point I'm making. And if that means I have to sacrifice the FBI going on hunts for people having incest, I'm willing to make that trade.
These are almost great points, except that you forget like these institutions like the AMA and this type of thing, which started out 150 years ago. That the government came in, they used to come in with antitrust laws and break these things up. And under anarcho-America corporatism, these antitrust laws would not exist. These people would become.
Do you know anything?
Let me finish, Dave.
Okay, I apologize. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so anyway, over and over again, we see what happens when corporations also gain a huge leverage on power when it comes to no check on them from any government entity. This was, in fact, the entire point of Franco's Spain and why Mussolini came up with the idea of fascism to begin with, which was that the state needed to stop large trade organizations from swallowing up small trade organizations. That was the point.
All right.
Let me finish, man.
Sorry.
I
thought you were done.
They recognized that this was an important thing because what ends up happening is corporate power can also become elite and it becomes a government unto itself. Anarcho-capitalism is not going to stop that from happening. And on top of that, when we're talking about these moral oughts, these moral claims, there's not going to be medical licenses. There's no driver's licenses. There's none of these things which would protect you from this degeneracy, which your libertarian idealism leads us to every time. You can't even tell us why any of these things are wrong to do, Dave.
Well, okay. I already told you, and I have the exact same answer for what you have for why they're wrong. But listen, let me ask you this. Have you, because I know you call yourself a paleocon on Twitter. Are you are you familiar with like the paleoconservative thinkers? Like
Pat Buchanan's my favorite. Yeah.
Okay, by the way, for anyone listening here, read every Pat Buchanan book you can get your hands on. They're the absolute best. And Paul Gottfried, too. You really should read him. He's just so good. And Sam Francis and all of these guys, dude. Go read them, and you will understand why this is just not right.
No, it's not,
Like,
because Pat Buchanan would agree with me. He would say
No,
that
no, no, no.
these
He
moral
would not-
oughts. He would say
Listen.
these moral oughts are going to require state enforcement no matter
Okay,
what.
but
That's
yeah,
why he
yeah,
was a
but
paleo con.
Okay, but what Pat Buchanan would not agree with you on is this idea that if there wasn't the government regulating these things, there'd be no reason for anyone to have licenses or something like that. That's just not true, dude. And
Who would
these guys-
license them?
Listen, all of these guys, the Pat Buchanan, Paul Gottfried, all of these guys, Sam Francis, they all said that a huge part of their program was a drastic cut in the size and scope of government
Because they didn't like the military-industrial complex.
No. Not just that. Yes, Andrew, believe me, I know this stuff, so I'm not wrong about this. Yes, they wanted a cut in the military-industrial complex, but not just that. They wanted to destroy the managerial state. That was their entire plan. Paul Gottfried said, and this was his view, which I thought was a perfect way to say it, which I think you should really consider, that he goes, I am strategically a radical libertarian. And he was very clear that he's not a libertarian because he believes in rights in the same sense that I do. Like, he was saying, I don't believe in your right to live any degenerate lifestyle that you want to, but I'm strategically a radical libertarian because he recognized that the only way that you could ever return to normalcy, culturally speaking, was to get DC out of the mix. That the centralized federal government cannot be this in control of the way children are raised, the way people are educated, the way people get healthcare and education and housing, without it totally perverting the natural
State
order.
and local governments are just as susceptible to these things, Dave, from lobbying and everything else. And you can't
No,
stop.
they're not.
You can't stop lobbying, and you can't stop people who have the will of saying, I own myself, from demanding that they be able to be represented, from demanding that they be able to have lobbying, from demanding that they own themselves. They're consenting.
That has nothing to do with self-ownership, but okay. But
it clearly does, Dave.
Listen, I would highly recommend, instead of you just trying to win this point against me, go read what Paul Gottfried and Pat Buchanan had to say about this. Because
why? I don't understand. Why can't you make their argument, Dave?
No. I can make their
then
argument.
Make it.
I'm just saying. I'm saying, Andrew, you're already in the mode of not trying to hear a point I have to say.
I've heard everything you said,
bro. Fire back immediately to get the win.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't agree with you, so I'm arguing with you. That's how that works.
I'm saying, right. Okay, I'm saying that these guys who you call yourself a paleoconservative, the people who were the leading thinkers of paleoconservatism, made these points really well. I'm just trying to say, maybe go get it from a source where you'll actually be able to listen to it from.
I'm listening to it from you right now. I'm arguing with your points because I don't agree with your points. Okay. And when we get to these ought claims of what we ought to do, it seems like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You're like, oh, I think doctors should have their medical licenses revoked for doing this bad thing. But if we really looking at what self-ownership would be in anarcho-capitalist land, it wouldn't be these licenses to begin with. I don't really understand why it is.
There could be plenty of licenses.
From who? Who would they be issued by?
Organizations, the same as they are now. What do you mean?
So the organization which issued the license would have some sort of authority and would be able to use force, right?
No, not necessarily, but they would be able to use their own version of, like, someone could be banned from their organization. Are you actually making the kind of like Bastiat thing where you can't separate government from society and that there can't be anything other than I mean, look, obviously all of the government involvement aside, but we all know that we were told a couple things not to say before we got on this show, right? Because of the YouTube government. There's lots of different.
Yeah, why would you have a problem with YouTube? That's a private organization doing what it wants, Dave.
What are you asking me now?
Why would you have a problem with YouTube? That's a private organization doing what it wants.
It's not private, though.
This is what's frustrating to me. If you could see, I just made a point. It was an excellent point. And then you immediately just pivot to something else and move the goalpost. So anyway,
it was your point,
Dave?
The point I was making was that there can be private organizations that can have their standards also. And then you pivoted to saying, do I support YouTube and what they do? In what context? What do you mean?
No, what you said was we had some TOS or things which would be TOS that we couldn't talk about on this private platform, but you must support private platforms existing because you're an anarcho-capitalist.
No,
so what's the problem? So you don't support private platforms existing?
Listen, man, do you support private restaurants existing?
Sure.
Okay, if they brought you, you ordered a T-bone steak and they brought it to you and it was freezing cold, would you support that because you support private restaurants existing?
No.
Exactly.
What does that have to do with anything?
It proves exactly.
But
what
you
were
believe
just
that the
asking me.
restaurant should have the right.
Because,
Wait, Dave.
Support
You believe
something existing doesn't mean you
that's
support
super
whatever
weird,
they
Dave.
do.
So you don't believe that restaurants should have the right to serve you a cold steak?
No, I do.
Well, then what are you talking about, Dave?
Did you honestly not get that?
No.
I
didn't honestly get that. No, it made no sense.
All right.
All right,
Andrew,
well, listen. What
point
Dave
to
is,
you, dude.
what Dave is saying is, I don't support you doing that. But what Andrew's saying, what do you support the right of a private organization to make their own choices? To which I believe Dave's answer is, yeah, they could make that choice, but I personally don't like that choice. I'm not in support of that choice. But I think Andrew, the point he's making is, yeah, but if you had an anarcho-capitalist society, these bad organizations would exist and they would do bad things.
And they would
you
go
would
out
have
of
to say they're
freaking
allowed to do it.
business.
Well,
because
okay,
it'd
fine.
be
If you want to
markets.
say, oh, if we had an anarcho-capitalist society, this thing in my head would happen and it could be really bad, whatever. I'm not going to sit here and even argue about that stuff. Okay, fine. I'm talking about, how about in the real world? We live under the biggest government in the history of the world, and look what it's led to. Let's talk about the world we actually live in.
Okay, let's talk about the world that we actually live in. It's my belief that the leftist paradigm, which is a libertarian paradigm of the non-aggression principle, is how leftists are able to control inside of this ginormous government apparatus, which they're continuously expanding. I think that they utilize victim classes like LGBTQ and others and say if they're not hurting anybody, then what's the problem? Libertarians have no way to counteract this because they can't justify why it would be a problem either. So what they end up doing is saying, well, we can't really say shit, can we? We can't really tell you that gays can't be married. We can't really tell you not to expand victim classes. We can't really tell you any of these things because ultimately you believe in the same principle that they do, which is do whatever the fuck you want as long as you're not hurting anybody, man. The good is the good, man. We'll smoke the dope, man.
All of this is that's just completely ridiculous. I think that libertarianism, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, would tell you that the Civil Rights Act was not justified, would tell you that government funding all of these universities is not justified, would tell you that all of this stuff, like, I mean, it would tear down the entire thing.
Wait, it would tell you slavery wasn't, or abolishing slavery wasn't justified?
What?
Would it tell you that abolishing slavery wasn't
what does
justified?
That have to do with what I just said?
Because that was an act of government, right?
Wait, hold on. But what does that have to do with what I just
Because
said?
when you're talking about civil rights, we're still going back to self-ownership.
The Civil Rights Act has nothing to do with slavery, dude.
No, but it has to do with self-ownership. And pre-Civil Rights Act, there were slaves, right?
No.
Yeah, there wasn't?
When did you think the Civil Rights Act happened?
The Civil Rights Act happened during the Jim Crow era. But what I'm talking about with slavery specifically is, did they have
100 years before the Civil Rights Act?
Yes. Did they have the right to self-ownership?
Anyway, yes, slaves had a right to not be slaves. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that
then we have logical extensions here, then, Dave, that we have to contend with.
Okay, leave Dave finish his point.
All right, Andrew, whatever, dude. All right, listen, the point that I'm making is to just say that what's happening in a college campus, which is essentially a government program. I mean, all of these colleges, whether they're like state schools or whether they just had all of their loans, guaranteed by the federal government or directly given out by the federal government, it's a big, giant government program. And the idea that they would ever sustain themselves in a market is ridiculous. And the fact that there are young people in those groups now want to identify as not the gender that they were born in has nothing to do with the non-aggression principle or self-ownership or anything about libertarian.
How does it not have to do with
philosophy on government?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's
no,
bullshit.
It doesn't at all. Doesn't at all.
Yeah,
dude.
not only that, but I've been demonstrating it over and over, and you have no defense from it. If you own yourself, why can't you choose your gender? Why can't you get your appendages cut off? Why can't you do these things, Dave? Why shouldn't you be able to?
Wait, if you don't own yours, listen, this is the thing I think you're not understanding, Andrew. I don't even get what you're saying here. If you don't own yourself,
which I don't think you do.
Right. Okay. Why shouldn't you be able to get your
that's my whole
call
my
yourself
whole
whatever?
Is just because there is no actual self-ownership.
So okay, I'm saying if
That's
you're
a
right,
non sequitur, Dave. It makes no sense.
Oh my God.
Okay.
What's a non sequitur, Andrew?
The
What did you
sequitur
just
is
say was a
saying,
non
what if
sequitur?
you don't own yourself? You can do those things too. It has nothing to do with whether you do or not.
Right, but you said, what if you do own yourself? And I'm saying, but what if you don't? So that's the point.
Yeah, what does that have to do with anything? That's the non sequitur.
If I may, I think that there's two ships passing here.
Right.
I think that the argument that Dave's making is this: if we decrease the size of the federal government and the government in general, as if he's suggesting, culturally, there wouldn't be the sort of brainwashing that's going on through those organizations that make these things a problem. Andrew's saying, though, he's saying, but the principle of if you own yourself, you could do whatever you want is foundational to a lot of these egregious behaviors that we would see. And so even if we shrunk the size of government, if we did so based on the mentality of, well, you could do whatever you want as long as it's agreed upon by consenting adults, we would see a lot of behavior that he finds to be undesirable or grotesque or sins, such as incest, homosexual relationships, etc.
Oh, all right. Let me ask you this. So I think we could probably all agree that between, let's just say in the last 100 years, okay, the size and scope of government in this country has grown enormously. Obviously, if you are familiar with the paleoconservatives, they were, hearkening back to the old conservatives who fought the New Deal back in the 1930s. And I could go back a little bit further than that to Woodrow Wilson creating the central bank and the income tax, but you have the New Deal, you have the expansions of government in World War II, the expansions post-World War II with the creation of the CIA and all of that stuff, the national security apparatus, the global empire. You have the Great Society in the 1960s. You have, I don't know, you fast forward to George W. Bush creating the Department of Homeland Security and the war on terrorism and Barack Obama and all this stuff. Do we have more degeneracy now or then? Does it seem like the growth of government
but that's a correlate. If I could point to you where there's large...
I'm just asking, but I'm asking, is there any correlation or any causation
there's some correlation, and I'll grant that there's some correlation, but I can also point to large government apparatuses where the state is entirely in control, where there's no degeneracy because you just face the wall in those governments, right? Sure. So the thing is that just correlating that because government has grown in size and degeneracy has also grown in size, it's not a good argument, because I can point to complete authoritarian regimes where there's none of that at all and the government's totally in charge. So the thing is that
what regimes are you thinking of?
I would guess that like places like North Korea, right? If you engage in degenerate actions, X bad thing happens to you, I would assume. So I'm just saying that the correlate itself is not enough to say that that is the cause. I think that NGOs are also a huge cause of these things, even NGOs which start absent any type of government movement at all, or massive think tanks which are privately funded. And oftentimes you see what'll happen with like the LGBTQ community and things like this. They create their own independent think tanks and NGOs, which then begin a mass lobbying campaign against morality. And once you have a lobbying campaign against morality, there's no real good reason why you should reduce government, because you can't make good claims for why you should. Just like, why should we do any of this stuff? What happens with these LGBTQ think tanks, especially, they'll even go into Christian churches, things like this. They offer them bags of money to reevaluate the messaging inside of these churches. These are apparatuses which then go and bribe the government. And these are private institutions. They all start as private institutions. The government's not commissioning.
But then they go and bribe the government.
Yeah, but the government. But here's the thing.
Part of it.
But here's the thing. I think that private institutions will always either form a government or make moves to subvert a government, because it's in their best interest to monopolize force. It's in their best interest to do it, just like it's in our best interest as Christians to monopolize the force apparatus of the state as well. If you want to scale back aspects of the state, fuck, great. I want to scale back aspects of the state too.
Well,
but that really
let's start
ultimately
there.
has
So what
nothing to
aspects?
do.
What aspects do you want to scale back?
Oh, I'd like to scale back, especially social spending when it comes to social safety nets. I'd like to scale back
why?
a lot.
Why would you want to? I'm just curious. I don't
Mhm.
mean to interrupt you, but so why do you want to scale back social aspects of the state?
Because I think that many of those social aspects are violations of ethical concerns. So, an ethical concern of robbing Peter to pay Paul, various things like this. I think that those are unethical. Those are ethics concerns.
Okay, and why? Why is that unethical?
It's unethical because I follow Christian ethics, and under this particular ethical framework, we would say that this type of theft would be incorrect, and that the state apparatus, it's not really their concern to move into that. That would be charitable organizations which would move into doing distribution that way.
I'm so curious about this, so I just have to ask because you kind of like grilled me before about what my ethics are. So what is it? So
we share the same. We share the same ethics. So
sure,
I don't know what your argument
Peter
is.
I'm not making an argument. I'm asking a question. So robbing Peter to pay Paul, why is that unethical? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm saying that if you have centralized relocation from the successful to the non-successful, the reason that this becomes an ethical concern is because you're engaging in theft, obvious theft.
Okay, but isn't that always what government does by its nature?
No,
is robbing Peter to pay Paul?
No, I don't think that taxation is necessarily theft in many circumstances. I think
so
it can be theft.
What makes it theft in your description, but not in others?
In which description?
So you just said it's obviously theft to rob Peter to pay Paul. So what made that theft, and what makes it not theft in other situations?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm not understanding the question correctly. Can you give me an example?
You just said in your example that this was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's theft. So what makes it theft in that situation, but not theft in other situations?
Like what other situation are you talking about?
Dude,
I just need a comparison real quick so I understand what you're asking.
What makes it in any other situation that government takes money from people not theft, but in the one you just labeled theft?
You mean, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying, why is it theft to take a bunch of money out of a rich guy's account and give it to a guy, who's just poor because you want to, versus some other unique situation like infrastructure spending or things like this?
What you just said, Andrew. Stop buying time, man. I'm just curious.
I'm not trying to buy time. I just want to get it clarified. I just want it clarified. I don't think that infrastructure spending is theft. I don't think that taxation, property taxation even, is theft. I don't think those things are theft. I think that a direct taking of your account for the purposes of giving it to a social group based on immutable characteristics is theft. That would be theft.
I'm just curious. What makes that theft?
That you're taking a thing which does not belong to you and creating a distribution of the thing which doesn't belong to you.
But so why wouldn't that be true for property taxes?
Because you don't actually own the property.
Right. So, but you just said they're taking something that doesn't belong to you. So, do you actually own that property?
No, this is why I'm saying that the construction, the construction of ownership is just that, a construction.
Yeah,
so property
Andrew,
is a construction.
Hold on, Andrew. I think I have you in something here, and I think I do. Why was it?
No, I just want to make sure I'm clarifying it.
Why was it theft in your example? Why did you own it in your example, but not in mine?
Because I don't really understand your example. That's why I'm trying to get it clarified.
It wasn't mine. It was yours.
Yes, the example of scaling back to rob Peter to pay Paul. I would say that is theft. However, taxation for property, I would not say it is, because
when you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, why is it theft?
Yeah, because it's based around the construction which we have for theft or non-theft for property. That's the point.
If I may, if I could try to clarify, I'm not trying to make anyone's argument.
Yeah. Just clarify what he's talking about.
This is what's going on. Dave's saying, like, look, if under your theory, all taxation would be theft because it's taking away from a person and giving to someone else. You seem to be saying it's not theft if it's giving to sort of a public good. So like property tax to pay for roads, that's not theft. But property tax, presumably you would say this, property tax to pay for welfare for single mothers, that would be theft, or to pay for LGBT issues or something like that. So he's saying Why isn't the property tax always theft? And you seem to be saying it's only theft if that money is given to particular entities. He's asking why that's
Aren't the
case.
people who build
Oh,
roads
based on immutable
entities?
versus non-immutable. So
Are they magic
if
fairies?
you
Do we give
are
money to the magic
utilizing
road
infrastructure and
gods
things
and they
like this,
bestow roads
and you're
upon
paying
us?
for that infrastructure, you have local levies which are gone through and voted on for that infrastructure. That can't be theft, because essentially the majority of your population is volunteering to move that money into the government coffers for that purpose. Whereas you're not, there is no such thing as voluntarism when it comes to the government levying your account. That's not voluntary and never has been. However, you have what's called, I'm going to explain, you have what's called duties, right? Duties. Duties can trump theft. For instance, you could say if you own yourself and the government conscripts you, that they're stealing you. Are they stealing you, Dave?
I'm sorry. Are they stealing
If the government conscripts you, you have a duty to go. A duty to go defend your homeland if you are conscripted for war. Is the government stealing you?
They're enslaving you, sure.
It's enslavement to be conscripted in a draft to defend your homeland.
Well, I mean, look, you see, to defend your homeland. How about if they conscript you to go over to Ukraine and fight the Russians? Is that enslaving you?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is, because I think you do have duties.
So if you, if your government led by Joe Biden decides that you're now conscripted and you will be on a plane over to Ukraine to fight on the front lines, they haven't enslaved you.
No, I don't think so. I think you have duties still in society. Don't you think you have duties to be conscripted? Like if you were attacked.
No, I think we have lots of duties, but I think if Joe Biden tells you to go die on the front,
you might be able to make good moral. You might be able to make good moral. Bro, you might be
resist that,
Dave. You might be able to make good moral objections to this type of draft, and the duty itself, that's fine. However, if your homeland's attacked and you're conscripted, that's okay, right? But how is that not enslavement then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it is. Or maybe
it's not. Or it is. It's enslavement to be drafted to protect the homeland if it's attacked by a foreign enemy, Dave?
Yes. Essentially, yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. Great. So no duty at all. No duties.
Here's the thing is that it's funny because you start laughing, but then like you can't, when I say if you were grabbed, gun put to your head and dragged out to the Ukrainian front lines and forced to fight on the Ukrainian front lines, you can't say, yes, that is me being enslaved.
I think you can make moral objections to it.
Hold on. Then you turn it to what if like people are, invading our country. Okay, so I'll say this. If people were invading our country and people like a foreign army is coming up through my neighborhood, I think you sure could make a moral argument that I have a responsibility to go to the front line.
Right. This is the point when we're talking about the draft. So we're not talking past each other.
Let me just finish this. So I think you could make an argument that I have a moral responsibility to go to the front lines and start fighting to make sure my family is okay.
What if you don't have a family?
Leave him finish.
Huh?
What if you don't have a family? It's just you.
Okay, but I'm talking about me, and I do. So anyway, let me finish.
But what if you didn't? Would you have a moral obligation then?
Great. So let me just finish.
Okay.
So, but if I say make the judgment that I go, you know what? There's too many of them. We got to retreat and we got to try to surround them and come back. And someone puts a gun at my face and goes, no, you have to go to the front line right now. Then yeah, in essence, they have enslaved me.
So then you're making a point again so that you understand.
No, I'm not.
I'll explain how. When you're talking about duties, you asked me, you said, would it be a duty? So I'm talking about what is a current duty. So I'm saying, yeah, currently that would be your duty. But the moral objections which you could make would be about just. You could say it's an unjust war, so therefore it doesn't fall under my duties. You are making the exact same claim. This is an unjust war. It doesn't fall under my duties, right? So if I'm conscripted, though, for a just war, like an invasion, then it does fall under duty. So then it's not enslavement, right? However, in both situations, it still would be enslavement by your ideology. You don't really have duty here.
That's not really the distinction. The distinction is whether voluntarism versus force. So no, I'm not saying that. Like if there could be a just war where someone still flees and abandons the war, But that doesn't mean that if they were but look, even whether you
dereliction of duty.
whether you think it's justified or not, it would still be enslaving someone to force them to be a soldier in that war.
So if
they
you
didn't want to be a part of it.
So if you're conscripted and your homeland is under attack, you have no greater duty to defend your homeland.
It depends on the situation, man. Look, there were lots of people in Ukraine who fled, and I don't know that they were wrong. I don't know. Listen, a situation like the war in Ukraine, the United States of America and NATO provoked Russia for decades. Literally just poked
Yeah,
this
what is that?
fucking bear.
Dude, this is on a tangent that has nothing,
No,
no bearing on the moral.
No. It has total bearing. Give me 2 seconds and you'll understand what I'm saying. They poked this bear over and over again until Russia invaded. And then when Russia invaded and Ukraine was about to get fucked up, look, I understand where there'd be people in Ukraine who wanted to jump on the front lines and fight again. But I also understand where there'd be people who would go, listen, I got to try to get my family out and get the hell out of here. So it's not so black and white as to like whether like there's this situation where someone invades your country and it's just justified to fight back against them. I think maybe if you're listening,
we're talking not about that. We're talking about conscription, though. So I do, and I'll steel man. I'll steel man. Hang on, I'll steel man the point. Yeah, I'll steel man.
Listen.
Let me steel man the point.
Last point on this. Then we're going to get closing statements because we have a lot of super chats and questions from the audience. So
yeah. So let me just steel man your point. Your point is, look, this isn't so black and white. There could be situations where I could see conscription as being a duty. I could see it as not being a duty. I'm not arguing that. I just want a concession that at least sometimes it must be. And if at least sometimes it must be a duty, then you do have greater duties than just owning you. Just owning you can't be enough. There must be additional duties on top of that, like conscription.
Sure. Well, look, if you're saying just owning me, again, I have a ton of duties on top of just owning me. I have a duty, an obligation to protect my wife, my kids, to provide for them, to give them a great life.
If you own yourself, why do you have such a duty?
Again, from what we said at the very beginning, it has nothing to do with owning myself. I do own myself. And why do I have such a duty? Because I believe in God and God wants me to be a great father and a great husband. So
God owns you.
Okay. Listen, there's never a good place to end. I know that it sucks. We could keep going on with this. What we're going to do is do closing statements.
All right.
Up to 7 minutes apiece. We will start with Dave. You can say whatever you want. Andrew, don't interrupt. And then Andrew can say whatever he wants. So you can summarize the debate. You get any positions that you wanted to clarify, whatever you like for 7 minutes. Then we'll get to some audience questions. So go ahead, Dave. Floor is yours.
All right. Well, look, let me just say before we go to these questions, I will say I have the feeling that Andrew annoyed me a bit in this debate, but I have a feeling I would really like the guy if we just hung out. And I actually have enjoyed some of the back and forths that we've had on this. So I would just say that I think there's been some points that are made here that I don't think accurately reflect the position that I'm taking, and perhaps I've been unfair in some of the positions Andrew's taking. So if let's just say I own a book
out here,
like let's say I don't know one of these books right here. Okay, here I got a book. Okay, I own this book. Now it's a really good book, by the way. This is what is this? This is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. I don't know. That happened to be the book next to me. Now let's say I get that book. Now, I've read it. I've actually read it twice. But let's just say I bought that book and I own it. And instead of reading it, I burned it. And you were to say, wait a minute, Dave, do you own that book? If you own it, it would be wrong for you to burn it rather than read it. The point is that, yes, I probably agree with you. It would be a better thing for me to do to read that book than to burn it. That has nothing to do with whether I own it or whether it would be right for someone else to come by force and take it away from me. I think that's kind of like the difference that's been, we've been talking past each other a little bit. I think that some of these outlandish examples about, well, if you really believe in self-ownership, then you can have no moral qualms about what anyone does with their self-ownership, just isn't accurate. And I think that in the world we're living in, and this is something, again, that the paleoconservatives, their best thinkers, please, anybody listening, go read Pat Buchanan or Paul Gottfried or Sam Francis or any of these guys. One of the things that they understood was that part of the reason why American society has degenerated so much, part of the reason why we've had such a divergence from normalcy in our culture, is because the government has gotten more and more powerful. And if you want to have more power in the hands of communities and churches and parents and families, you want to reduce the size and scope of government. So that's what I would say. And whatever Andrew wants to finish with before we go into questions.
Okay, sounds good. Andrew, you got up to 7 minutes. Go ahead.
You would like me.
Sorry, that did not work. Let me try this again.
But we'll just do a good old fashioned convo. The first thing is that you kind of pretend and are pretending to the audience that these are extreme examples of things which I bring up, but they're not. These are things which are happening right now. We have incest laws right now. We have laws against LGBTQ or for LGBTQ right now. These are social issues of our time, transitioning social issue of our time. These things are not things which are in a far away, far off land, in a faraway future. These are right now, right here, right in our face, and we're discussing them as though they're right in our face because they are. And so when we get to the moral ought portion of this, you realized, I think, early on that you can't really justify self-ownership as anything other than a construction, and that your morality comes from God. That's why I was willing to just kind of grant all the absurdity and say, sure, it's just God talking in my mind. Dave says, me too. It's like, great. Well, then we agree. It's all divine command. There's no ownership. It's just a social construct. Perfect. Now we know where we can go with our moral ought claims, how we get to where it is that we're going. Unfortunately, for these oughts, we're going to need enforcement. There's no way around it. And that's going to require some type of enforcement apparatus. Now, maybe it doesn't have to be the state. Fine. But I didn't hear anything absent the state. I never actually heard Dave say a word about why people can't engage in these if they own themselves. Unfortunately, he never really gave us any good reasons for why, if you do own yourself, why you can't engage in these absurd activities, other than he just really doesn't like them, other than to appeal to what I would, which is divine command. And if that's the case, you don't own yourself, and the non-aggression principle no longer makes sense. He never could justify that, ever. And that was kind of the core at the heart of this debate. When we get into duties, he says, I do have some duties and obligations, but when I ask him where they come from, it's not, it's from God. Again, it's divine command, which gives him these duties and obligation, not libertarianism. Libertarianism as a core isn't doing anything to advance what could be a duty inside of society. It's just unfettered rights. And all a right is a privilege absent a duty. When we get into whether or not can a person be conscripted, sometimes, maybe, don't know, kind of, possibly. It just, it's context matters. It's like, okay, yeah, context matters, but at the core, can they, without them being slaves? I think that Dave kind of understands, yeah, there's a time and a place for that, where there's a greater duty that we have to appeal to.
I'll have to actually close this stream.
Overall,
there's no way for me to
because
hop
it
onto
was
the
combative, and we are coming at it from really different worldviews. I don't think we got to the heart of everything that either of us would have liked to have gotten to the heart of. But I did enjoy the spirited debate. And again, no grudges at all, Mr. Smith. And in the future, I'll just come on your show.
But I think it's not going to work.
And we'll have a good convo or something like that. But I do hope you did enjoy yourself at the very least.
When I come back.
So thank you.
I did enjoy myself, Andrew, and thank you very much. I don't agree with your synopsis of my opinion, but I am definitely down to do another podcast together.
Well, cheers to you, sir.
Cheers, brother.
I had fun. I loved it.
We can drink. Are they nationalists? Are we're gonna make that legal? All right, good.
Yes, good.
Yours does.
I insist.
I thought it was great. I would love to talk to both of you. I was writing down things. If I was debating either of you, I would have said to both of you, but we don't have time for that tonight. So here's what I'm going to do. We are going to go through half of the super chats. There's a lot. So audience, I ask you to please bear with me. And because we have a lot of people that are on the call as well. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes left. So the first thing I want to say is thank you to anyone who subscribed or that donated subscriptions to people and memberships. We really do appreciate it. It means a lot. We're going to try.
And as a quick intermission, I'm sorry to cut in.
Yes.
Dave, while you're at maximum audience, can you shout your channel out, tell everybody where they can find you
Yeah,
and
yeah,
where they can follow you?
ComicDaveSmith.com is my website, and at Comic Dave Smith on Twitter, and I'm part of the problem on YouTube and all over the place. But yeah,
okay. Well, I just want to let you know that I had worked on this great rhetorical flourish that I was ready to use tonight that I couldn't deploy. So I'm just going to tell you what it was. It was going to be okay. So it was supposed to be this this idea that, you know, it came up where you would say something like, you know, well, I'm a comedian. You know what I mean? I'm not going to know the great ins and outs of these moral odds. And then I was going to respond with, oh yeah, well, I'm an entertainer and I'm super entertaining. So tell me a joke, funny man. And you know, it would have been
now. But it was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching with me. If you want to keep watching, go over and find this on Andrew's channel. I should be one of the callers there. Yeah, a lot of fun. That was messy, but I think they finally got to talk about the things I hoped they would talk about. So thank you all for being here, and I'll talk to you guys next time on a stream.